What is going on, all true believers? Welcome to the first episode of the Maximum Marvel podcast. I am your host, Jake, and with me is my co-host and my man that's basically the Iron Man to my Captain America, vice versa. Flip it. It's whatever. My dude, Justus. Justus, how are you doing today?
What's up, everybody? I'm really excited to get this thing on the road. I talk about wanting to do a podcast, and Jake was like, "You want to do one? Let's do it!" Like, so I was definitely with it. So someone who was just as excited about it as me, absolutely. And just Jake is my man. Like, we've done so much together, like over the last month. So absolutely, I'm super excited to get started.
Yeah, and this is like the first time that this is going to be going up on this channel that everybody who's, if they are watching this from this old channel, basically they're like, what the hell? This isn't Dragon Ball content. What the hell is this? I've rebranded the channel. I'm back though, because I've always been looking at this channel like I want to come back. So I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to come back, I'm going to do what I want to do. We're going to talk about Marvel. It's called Maximum Marvel, right? The channel is Maximum Marvel.
It's all comics.
Yeah, but it's talking about everything. I mean, if you want to be like Shazam's old name used to be Captain Marvel, but whatever. But basically the main thing to talk about, right, is like the Marvel stuff going on right now. Now, of course, DC exists. And I'm a big fan of DC just as much as I am Marvel. I want all superheroes to do well. It just turns out that Marvel knows what they're fucking doing when it comes to
content,
movies.
Just content,
yeah.
Period. Yeah.
Well, just their movies. I would say DC, and we're going to talk about this. Let's we'll go into it. But starting off, we have a new thing that just came out today, right, Justus? What if?
Oh, right.
What if?
I kind of forgot about it already.
Yeah, I mean, I don't blame you. Now, when we're talking about this, I've said it on multiple occasions. When it comes to animated stuff, DC is like on a high level, right? DC's animated stuff is amazing.
Iconic.
Marvel's animated stuff has kind of been, whatever, wishy-washy. It's something, but this is different. This is them kind of weaving in a storyline that's going on in the actual MCU as we know it, and they're kind of playing around with some multiverse stuff. And we got our first episode today of What If, which, if anybody knows, basically was a comic book series that they had, and they're like, you know what, we're going to do that now that we're exploring all these different avenues of what if. Let's do some real life fan fiction. And so they go into it. And the first episode comes out of Captain Carter. Before I give my thoughts on it, Justus, what do you think about the first episode of What If? Now, I've heard about the first 3 episodes of What If from watching some reviews of people that got advanced screenings. We've seen the first episode. What do you think of it so far?
You know what? Thinking about it over, I'm going to give it a chance, because I do remember when I started watching WandaVision, I was like, what the hell is this? But like over time, it kind of got really, really good, actually. But I was, if I can be candid, just here in the first episode of What If, I was a little underwhelmed. I knew what to expect. I knew we were going to see, Peggy become the first Avenger. So like I didn't know it was gonna be a first episode, and I thought maybe it would be a little different, but it honestly just seemed like it was a remake of Captain America. Captain America.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing with obviously Steve getting shot, and he was such a scrawny kid that I don't know how he recovered from that so easily, but that's neither here nor there. And then also another thing is what was the suit called? The what buster?
The Hydra Stomper.
Yeah. So that's essentially the first Iron Man. I don't know what the difference between, like, what would have just inspired Howard, excuse me. Yeah. What would have just inspired Howard to randomly create an iron suit when that wasn't really something that he was on the road to do before. Because I'm pretty sure Tony created it in a cave somewhere. So
Yep.
for Howard to just, retroactively think of it, 40, 50, 60, 70 years earlier, kind of odd to me. But so I'm kind of interested to see how it goes from there. And then we've seen the preview where you got Killmonger, who I'm assuming is the Black Panther, come and he, saves Tony from the whole, Stark missile, which created Iron Man. So, and then your father created Iron Man technically in this universe. I would think that Tony would have been Iron Man a little earlier. So I don't know, man. I guess we'll see how it goes. But just to answer the question, the first episode was a little underwhelming. I'm not a huge fan of the first Captain America movie, so to me it was like even doubly, I don't want to say boring, but it just wasn't my cup of tea specifically. But how about you, bro? How did you feel about it?
Okay, so when we're gonna talk about this, I watched this episode and I was like, obviously I have an open mind. I'm really excited for this. We're coming right off of Loki, so like we're really expecting high things from these shows that come out, but I don't think Marvel has officially come out and said like, oh, this is canon. We just kind of assume since the Watcher
No,
at the
I
beginning
think
of,
they have
have
said
they?
come out and said it's kind of canon. Yeah,
Okay, well, canonically, if it is in fact, in it, I mean, the Watcher comes out and says time is not a straight line. There are all and we're like, okay, I kind of see where this is going. So they're gonna go into the first Captain America movie, which people can debate this all they want, but the first Captain America movie is not really, so it's entertaining. I wouldn't say it's top tier MCU to begin
Oh,
with.
so
It's
you
average
agree?
film.
I thought we
Yeah,
were going to disagree on that. Okay,
no,
cool,
no,
awesome.
no,
All
no,
right,
no,
bro.
no. I love the Winter Soldier. But that's the Captain America movie that I like. I don't count Civil War as a Captain America movie, even though it's called that.
That's an
But
Avengers movie.
yeah, that's an Avengers movie. When I saw this episode, I was like, 33 minutes. Okay, I'll see what they're gonna do here. I felt like the pacing in this episode was like, oh, I hit my mic. When I gotta stay back here. When we hit like each point, we have to hit each point when we're going through it. I felt like it was just going through the paces like, yeah, we got to fit a movie that was 2 hours. We got to fit a whole story that was 2 hours and 33 minutes. Now, you cannot tell me that Marvel could not make this episode 40 to 50 minutes long. You're telling me like
They absolutely could have. Every episode needed to be 45 minutes to an hour long. I don't know
yeah,
what this, and it's animated. You don't even need actors. Like, I don't understand where this 30-minute runtime is coming from.
yeah, like the only thing that it makes me think of is that it's a show like that's about the length of what a show would be on like a cartoon on television, right? Would be in like a 30-minute block. So I'm looking and let's not even talk about some of the dialogue in this episode is awful. Like and some of the voice acting is just like the guy who does Bucky, there's like 3 or 4 lines where the inflection that my dude has is just so off. And some of the jokes are just like Peggy says Steve and then he goes Rogers. Like, yeah. Okay. It was so kind of I didn't know if they were trying to make it more kiddie or things like that. There were things that were thrown in the episode that were just throwing me off. Like some humor just wasn't landing. Some things like Howard Stark when they're like in the bar says like they're arguing with the commander about the Tesseract and the power. And he says this line that's just absolutely like, you don't know anything about harnessing the power of this and what it could do. I'm like, dude, like that would never be in an MCU film. Like that, like they would have never put that in there. There were things that were just throwing me off the whole episode. I really think it would have benefited from being longer. The Steve Rogers becoming Iron Man really feels like it'd be shoehorned in. If we're actually really doing a what if thing, I'm pretty sure Howard Stark wouldn't have even thought about making an Iron Man suit. Howard Stark had at least in the MCU, he had the idea of an arc reactor. He never had the idea of an Iron Man suit. So it almost felt like they threw that in there to give Steve a reason to keep being with Peggy and do things throughout the story. Uh, I understand it's a what if, but I'm just saying, if we're saying that the only difference is going to be that Peggy Carter became Captain America, Steve would have just continued being a normal dude. They wouldn't have made him the Hydra Stomper. Like, it was kind of just thrown in there. But overall, I think that episode just could have benefited from being longer, some things being explained. And then what the hell is the tentacle thing that Hydra like brings out? Like, I understand their logo has always been the tentacle like squid thing, but like, this is the first time they ever show it, and you're kind of just like, okay, what? Like, I thought when they opened up the portal with the Tesseract, I was like, oh, he said that he's got something coming from the stars. I thought maybe they were gonna get the Chitauri like involved from like something was gonna happen, but no, it just they threw that in there, and there were just things that really confused me, and it took me out of it. And from what I've heard, I think it was kind of what a lot of people are saying is that they wanted to start it off on a strong note, just so that the next few episodes, which I mean, you probably don't know much about, but I've heard are kind of just whimpering episodes too. From what I think, if the next two episodes are worse than this, like I don't know how they're gonna keep, like, obviously I'm gonna watch it every week, but like I don't know how they're gonna keep me engaged and keep normal people engaged. If I'm someone who's not subscribed to Disney Plus, Loki would be a reason for me to subscribe to Disney Plus when that comes out every week. This, dude, I could wait until this is just fully like done and then watch it. Like, it doesn't feel like it has as much weight to it as it should. But
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
there's definitely a lack. I'm sorry. There's definitely a lack of urgency, and the thing about what if it kind of scares me in that regard. Personally, I thought the first episode of Loki was masterful. Like, when I saw it, I was thinking like this could potentially be the best, like one of the best shows ever.
The
And then
first
the way
two
they finished,
episodes were great.
I love the entire thing. I just, when I watched the first episode, I was thinking like, wow, I didn't want that to end. WandaVision, I was like, I don't need. I actually stopped watching it until like 2 weeks before the finale, and people were like, "Oh, it's so good, it's so good." I went back and I gave it a chance, and it was really good.
Yeah.
But the thing about What If that scares me is each episode really has nothing to do with the previous episode, so there's nothing to build on. Right? You're just going back and forth through like different possible storylines. So, well, I don't want to say that because I could be wrong. They could be,
They could be building.
interlinked. Hopefully that is the case, because I think that that's best case scenario. If they actually do it in the sense where it's like just a whole bunch of different, storylines, then I think that this could be very boring. I hope not, but it could be. The other thing that kind of bothered me about the episode was like Steve was nobody. He was a scrawny kid who just joined the army because he wanted to. Like, nobody wanted him. Like, he was a private. Like, he was somebody who was very insignificant. And then, the guy came and he saw that he was a good person and strong minded and all this other stuff, and was like, okay, we're going to give this kid the superhero serum. I'm sorry,
Super soldier. Yeah.
Yeah, but once you give it to Peggy and Steve is no longer in the equation, how does Steve Rogers end up in some of those rooms he's in where like he's talking with US generals about fighting Hydra? Like, he's a nobody. And then why is he of all people getting the Iron Man suit? He's a nobody. Like, the only reason he became a somebody was because he got the super soldier serum. So that really just, it felt forced to me. It really did feel forced to me. So I was overall disappointed in the first episode.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. But the question is, what does everybody else think about this? Make sure to let us know down below. I would like to know what everybody thinks about What If. And that, like, I feel like maybe it's just us looking too much into it. Maybe just the casual person does like it. They're like, oh, that's cool. Like, yeah, Steve gets the Iron Man suit. Maybe we're just looking a little bit too much into it, but make sure to let us know down below what you think. Now,
I do have a question for you really quick.
Go ahead.
So there's a theory that in Loki, since we're on Peggy Carter, I might as well just bring it up now. There's a theory that in Loki, there is a woman who looks kind of sort of like Peggy Carter, and she is being uh, arrested by the TVA, right? Obviously, the whole thing with Cap going back in time and blah 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 blah. What do you think of the possibility that Cap and Peggy could have gotten pruned from the timeline where Cap goes back?
I would see. I like the theory. While I don't think that it actually like, I think it's just a thing that we've kind of like created in our heads, just kind of like, oh yeah, that kind of looks like Peggy. Oh my God. Think about like, I don't think it's that deep. I don't think that the Russo brothers really, I mean, even they don't truly understand what they wrote when it comes to Endgame, having Steve go back. They've said it on multiple occasions, like things that just don't make sense very much when it comes to
Yeah,
Steve
there's
returning stuff.
different
So
continuities from like different people who worked on the
yeah,
movie. Yeah,
yeah. So like I don't think that that's the thing. If they did somehow loop that in, that would be great. But the big thing about this is I think all this probably takes place after they kill Kang or Immortus. Like I feel like this all takes place after it, now that all these branching things are happen. If it's canonically, it happens after that. So I think that if we're saying that that's the Peggy from Endgame, I don't know, man. I feel like that they would have been brought up way faster to the TVA than when they
well,
grabbed Loki.
because in the TVA, time isn't measured the same way it's
Mhm.
measured like on Earth, and not only that, but Steve went back in time to live out his life with Peggy. So
Mhm.
that means they,
But that
she could
they
have
would
been
have
born
grabbed
in
him
the
like right
70s.
there, right?
Yeah, that's true. I would think so. And then
Yeah.
Steve became an old man. So that's kind of odd. Yeah, I'm not really
Yeah.
sure how that works.
It doesn't hold a lot of weight. It's a cool theory. I think that obviously there's somebody out there who's just like, well, if you actually look at this and know this, then like, but I'm just looking at it at face value. I don't think it holds much. But one of the big things about What If, right, is that it was a comic book series. There was a bunch of comic books like, what if the world knew that Daredevil was blind, or what if the Wolverine killed the Hulk? Like they had a bunch of these stories, and one of the big things that came out this week, Justice, was that comic book artist with Marvel. I don't know if you'd heard about this. Comic book artists in their own right don't get paid a lot of money because the comic book industry nowadays isn't as big as it used to be. And one of the things is that it is said that Disney and Marvel, when they use storylines from comics, they only pay the comic book writer $5,000 when they're going to use their storyline in a movie.
What?
$5,000. This is
Oh,
this is a this is a
that's
big thing that comes
despicable.
out. I mean, especially these are $1 billion movies, and
Literally, yeah.
you're paying the person who came up with the original storyline $5,000. That's it. I mean, I understand that it's a big corporation, but I kind of just feel like that it doesn't come off very well that like these people that are doing all this and already don't make enough money, you're then just being like, here's $5,000 because you wrote something cool and we're going to use it and make $1 billion. Like
Right.
I don't get that. What do you think about that?
That is actually very disheartening. And not only that, but the whole thing with Scarlett Johansson and the Black Widow film about how they were going to pay her profits from the actual in theater, profits, but then they went ahead and they released it on Disney Plus anyway. And so, obviously, if it's on Disney Plus, not as many people are inclined to go see it in theaters, and that's just going to mess with the revenue. So, Scarlett Johansson ended up suing Disney, so that's very disheartening that these guys are, because not only are you the highest grossing comic book series, ever, like you got Black Panther was
Mhm.
1 billion and maybe a half. You got Endgame was 2 billion. You got Infinity War was 2 billion. You got, just all this money coming
Yeah.
in. The fact that you don't want to pay people what they earned, especially comic book. Like, because when you first said it, I thought maybe they were getting like 5,000 to like write the comics. I was like, that's not bad, like per
Yeah.
comic, sure. But then when you said to use it, it's kind of crazy. Like $5,000 to use my comic book, which is going to literally make you billions. Like it's
Mhm.
not even a joke. So that's really just disheartening that those guys aren't trying to shelve out pieces of the pie.
I mean, you got to just think about it too. The guy who wrote the Infinity War, and of course Infinity Gauntlet and Infinity War and all these, they're written by different people, these storylines. But to use these storylines, especially the Infinity War storyline, is absolutely crazy. That to think that they paid $5,000 to said comic book artist to use that. Some of the greatest storylines in comic book history, or maybe ones that are overlooked still, and comic book fans understand it. Like, and yet Disney's just like, well, yeah, you get a nice solid $5,000 for it, and we're gonna go pocket 999,900, and like, oh, it's ridiculous. I think that just this alone, like, just further cements the fact that they're a business, and I understand that, but sometimes these practices that I see just don't really fly well with me. They really don't. They
Yeah,
really don't
because
jive.
when you think about it, like Kevin Feige is an absolute genius. Like, I
Mm,
do not want to take anything away from Kevin Feige. He is the man. Like, quite literally, I want to become Kevin Feige just so I can know what happens in
mm,
the next 20 years, right? But the comics are the
mm.
original inspiration. You know what I mean? So now Kevin Feige, of course, he mixes it up and he puts his own little MCU spin on it,
Yeah.
which I absolutely love because then it's not so predictable. But come on now, like these guys literally set the baseline for
Mm.
UCU, and I'm not saying it's Kevin Feige's fault. No one is getting paid,
Oh
but
yeah.
I'm saying, like these guys are the people who put the ideas out here. These are the people who inspired generations so that you could even make a profit off of making comic book movies. You know what I mean? Like you should really, cut them a bigger piece of the pie, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's 100% not Kevin Feige at all. We've seen what he's done, especially talking about the Scarlett Johansson situation. Kevin Feige is livid about that happening, and that it's all Disney. It comes from the top. Bob Chapek, their CEO now. It's not Bob Iger anymore. It all comes down from him, who basically, if we want to go into it, he's ruined Disney parks, especially with prices and things that make it almost impossible to go to the parks without spending a fat check. He's just doing all these things. He's a businessman, but he doesn't understand the moral things to it. But the question is, what does everybody else think about this? Do you think they should get paid more than $5,000? I better not see a comment that says anything else other than that down in the comments section. But Justice, we got some news today. Do you remember that Venom 2 is coming out this year?
Absolutely. Let there be carnage. Please let
Venom
there be carnage.
Venom 2 is coming out this year, and or we hope, but we'll
Yeah,
talk about that
hopefully.
later. We'll talk about that later. We got a whole section on that. But Tom Hardy has come out and talked about the possibility for a Venom 3 and how he wants to do a Venom 3. And a big thing is he wants to do a crossover with Spider-Man. That's what they want to do. Now, this is the big thing, and I want to get your comments on it because just at the Sonyverse as a whole, I don't know what you thought about the first Venom movie. I don't know what you think the second movie is going to be and what you think of Morbius, but you see everything that they're getting ready to do. And do you think that they one need Spider-Man, which might be an easy question, but also do you think that bringing Spider-Man in, like, a lot, it's gonna confuse people? Do you think it's gonna have to be with them being in talks with Marvel to have basically the Sonyverse and the MCU somewhat connected, or is that what a lot of this multiverse stuff has to do with coming in the future? What do you think of the Sonyverse as a whole, and what do you think that they want to do? Obviously we know they want to cross it over, but do you think it's actually feasible?
Um, I am a big fan of I like the first Venom movie. Uh, it was a good introduction to me.
Mm,
And I'm a big fan of Venom as a character. So I'm definitely excited to see Let There Be Carnage. I'm really excited to see Woody go in, just because Woody's a great actor, and I can imagine he's probably going to kill that role. Same way I was excited to see Owen Wilson play more like Mobius. Like just it seems like a perfect role or pairing. So we'll see what goes with that. As far as a Venom 3 and Spider-Man, see, I didn't hear that news today, but while you were mentioning it, I was thinking like, well, if there is a Venom 3, then they should include Spider-Man. So when you said that, it kind of just made a lot of sense. Why not? I don't see why you wouldn't. I kind of feel like Sony and Disney are playing games. Like there's so much money to go around, but they're like being picky and kind of just being arrogant. Who wants to see who can get the most out of the deal? They kind of just want to jip each other, is what it seems like. We almost didn't get Spider-Man back in the MCU because they couldn't come to an agreement. So that would have been so disheartening, especially when you have a huge part of Tom Holland's Spider-Man character is mourning the loss of Tony Stark and basically becoming not the next Tony Stark, but that next guy, that next genius scientist who's a superhero, right? And I think Marvel might have done that on purpose so that they could have leverage over Sony in negotiations. Like, Tony's a big part of his character development, so of course he's got to stay in Marvel, whatever the case may be. But I like it. Like, what, bro? Like, who wouldn't want to see Venom in the MCU? Like, man, we've got an X-Men are coming. The Fantastic Four is coming. Like, Sony, 100%. I don't want to say nothing because sure, the Venom movies could do good on their own, but 100% of $10 is way less than 10% of $1,000, right? I personally feel like it's a no-brainer. Like if there's and not only that, but Tom Hardy is a phenomenal actor, right? So like I'm seeing this guy in Inception and everything. Like he's just a phenomenal actor, right? So and Batman, duh, of course, right? He's Bane, bro. He was Bane. Like, come on now, like so, like I just feel like with that much star power. You've already turned him into somewhat of a household name in terms of superhero movie characters. He's one of the more popular superhero movie characters, right? So you throw him in the MCU, you put him together with like Benedict Cumberbatch and Tom Holland and whoever else, like that seems like a no-brainer to me personally. But I am not an exec at Sony, so I can't make the decisions. But I think that it would be beneficial to everybody involved. What you thinking?
Okay, so what I'm thinking is Spider-Man is one of my favorite superheroes ever, right? One of the things that really killed me as a 8 or 9-year-old at that point, when the movie came out, Spider-Man 3, was them doing the Venom character, the disjustice that they did to that character was absolutely ridiculous.
No. The guy who played Eric from that 70s show.
Yeah. That's Topher Grace. So Topher Grace, what they did with the character when Venom came out, one of the big things that I was really, really hoping they would do is find a way to leave it open for eventually Spider-Man to come into the universe. And now with them introducing Carnage, it makes me want Spider-Man in the universe even more because of games like Maximum Carnage and storylines where Spider-Man and Venom team up to defeat Carnage. I'm hoping that maybe this movie doesn't tie up everything and Carnage is still out there and eventually we can get a Spider-Man crossover. Just my whole view on the Sonyverse as it is, I feel like they're going to keep teasing us, right? They're going to keep being like, here's the Daily Bugle. Oh, here's Michael Keaton in Morbius. Oh, here in the Morbius trailer, there's also a Spider-Man in the background with murderer written over it. But that's not a reference to the MCU, right? No, it's not. Like they're going to keep playing these games. And I feel like there has to be some sort of plan.
Real quick, I don't mean to cut you off. Wait, Morbius is the vampire, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
So you said that there was a Spider-Man. They said murderer in the background.
Yes. Okay. So if you go and
I didn't see this, but in the last Spider-Man movie, isn't he being accused of being a murderer for
Yes.
killing. Okay.
Yes.
I didn't
See,
know
this
that.
is what I'm saying. They're playing games, right? Because if you watch that trailer, you'll see it's a screen grab, but it's Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man from the Spider-Man PS4 game that came out. It's a screen grab of him, and it says murderer written over it with like street graffiti. And then Michael Keaton shows up in it. So it almost feels like Sony note that obviously I swear maybe they're doing it just because they know that the deal is coming up for Spider-Man again, and they want to set it up to where if they just rip Spider-Man out of the MCU like that, they could just change the background a little bit, not have a lot of references to Tony Stark, and then they can just have their own Spider-Man in their universe with their own villains. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about later, which is my problem with Spider-Man No Way Home that's coming out. That was there's a couple of big things that I want, but just thinking of the Sonyverse as a whole, I think it's a no-brainer to eventually have Spider-Man come and be in that universe. One of my big things coming out is it almost feels like that Sony has always had this thing that they wanted to do with their villains. I mean, when the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies were coming out, they were already talking about Sinister Six movies and all this stuff. So one of the things that I know they want to do is eventually have everything come together again. And that's kind of one of my things that I've always thought about too, is these Sonyverse movies almost feel like they're made for Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. And maybe this is just the theory out there, but maybe showing Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man in the background, and maybe they do something with this next Spider-Man movie that, you know, if they can't get Tom Holland's Spider-Man in there, maybe they find a way to get a different Spider-Man in there. You know, they still have the rights. Maybe that they leave Tom Holland in the MCU if Disney just doesn't want to play games like that. They do not want to have, maybe they do their own thing. One of my things is I want the Sonyverse to eventually just everything come together, because right now it kind of feels like there's no end game for it, right? There's nothing that really, they're just making these movies and it keeps going like, oh, we'll make another Venom movie. Oh, they're making the Kraven the Hunter the movie, which I can't wait for. Just they're making all these things, but it's like, yeah, but there's no Spider-Man. I know that eventually if these movies keep doing well and Disney just still doesn't want to play ball, that I think that Spider-Man will be in Sony's hands again, because that is the only property, except for the Hulk, which Universal still owns, is the only property that Disney does not have their hands on right now. And that is Spider-Man and his entire catalog. So if they're going to have Spider-Man, either they need to cross him over or Sony is going to take him back. I think that that's almost inevitable.
Okay.
But
I have a question for you really quickly.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you said that, and back when Tom was kind of iffy, or not Tom, but back when Sony was iffy about letting Tom back in the MCU, you said that maybe Toby or Andrew possibly might could go back to being the Spider-Man for Sony, and Tom stays in the MCU. How would that work? Do you think that they would give like Tom a new role, kind of similar to how they made Captain America Nomad, or what do you mean?
No, so I think that there's a deal that could be on the table that if Disney does not want to play games with Sony, that Sony says, all right, you don't want us to connect our universes. Well, then you can have that Spider-Man and we'll help you produce those movies. But we're going to have our Spider-Man.
What would incentivize them to let them have Tom, though?
To let them have Tom would be the money that they still make from letting them have Spider-Man in their universe. So then you're double dipping on the Spider-Man. You have your own Spider-Man, and then they have a Spider-Man. That's kind of the thing that goes on with that. Now, I don't think that's going to happen when those deals fell through. Tom Holland, even though they said he talked to Bob Iger and really wanted to stay and things like that, Tom Holland, regardless, maybe he doesn't want to be Spider-Man anymore if he's not in the MCU. They always have these backup options, and I'm just gonna keep saying it until the cows come home. I still think that Andrew Garfield feels like the Spider-Man for the Sonyverse movies that they have right now. It almost, when it comes to the feel of the movies themselves, they don't feel like they would be MCU movies. They feel like they've still got that Amazing Spider-Man universe feel to them. So definitely, when it comes to the Sonyverse, I want them to cross it over, but if they don't, then it is what it is. But what does everybody else think? Make sure to let us know down below in the comments what you think about Venom possibly crossing over with Spider-Man. What is your theory? What would you want when it comes to Spider-Man and Venom finally meeting? Is it a different Spider-Man you want? Maybe you want Tobey Maguire back like I do. Maybe that's something you want. But let's keep on with this train that we're talking about with Venom. We're going to be talking about movie delays, Justice. So one of the big things when it comes to the Rona going around is that there's now a Delta variant of it. And one of the things is that already shut down Clifford the Big Red Dog movie. Oh my God, the world is over. Clifford the Big Red Dog is no longer coming out in theaters indefinitely. But one of the things that happened after that is that they released the Venom Let There Be Carnage trailer. And they didn't put a definite date on the end of it. And they pulled definite dates from the website. And they just said this fall. Now, if Sony's going to do that and Paramount is going to say, you know what, you're going to have to wait to get Clifford because we think it's $1 billion movie. But Disney has to be looking at this now and going, all right, well, Jungle Cruise, we already had Jungle Cruise come out, and that was kind of a colossal failure, at least when it comes to how much the movie cost them to make and how much it's making. And then Black Widow comes out, and it does well the first weekend, falls off the second weekend, and then Disney Plus, it makes $60 million, but still nowhere close to what they needed. Do you risk with these movies coming out? You've got Eternals coming out. Shang-Chi is the next one that comes out. And then you have Spider-Man in December. Do you risk any of these movies flopping? Because there are lots and lots of problems of putting things on Disney Plus, especially when it comes to piracy. So do you bite the bullet and delay them again? Or do you want to see what happens when you put them out in theaters? Like, take me in the mind of a Disney executive, and then we'll talk about what we want them to do afterwards.
Well, I feel like the thing about Disney is they have Disney Plus. Sony doesn't have like a Sony Plus to my knowledge. Maybe they use Paramount Plus. I'm not really sure. But
actually, Sony has a deal with Netflix, I believe.
Okay. They're not putting a brand new movie out on Netflix though.
Hell no,
so,
they're not.
Exactly. So that's the thing about Disney is so the thing that bothered a lot of people was that the Carnage trailer came out and we still have no sign of Spider-Man No Way Home, like no trailer, no anything, and that bothered a lot of people. But I think that Sony is really like, okay, we know that Spider-Man is our our specifically money maker, and it has, obviously the partnership with Marvel, but we want it to be as maximum profit as possible, right? So I think that's why they're going to use Venom as like a test. They're going to see, okay, let's look and see where the public's, where they at. Like, do they want to go out to the movies and actually go support Spider-Man? Because if you don't support Venom, chances are you're probably not going to get a huge turnout for Spider-Man. Even if it is bigger, it's not going to be as big as you would want it to be, right? The thing about Marvel is like Shang-Chi's coming. You mentioned the Eternals are coming. You still got Disney Plus, and you know that specifically with the Eternals, that pushes the MCU forward. And those movies that push the MCU forward, i.e. Civil War, Endgame, Infinity War, movies like that, where Loki, where it like kind of takes you into the next, phase or kind of moves the storyline along. We know that those movies are very, very successful in Marvel. And then when you have like your Black Widows and your Ant-Mans and movies like that don't necessarily push the storyline along, they're kind of just like origin stories, or they're just a story, period. It doesn't have doesn't have a whole lot to do with the continuity up to the point of its release. I don't think those movies do as well as the others. That's why I think Ant-Man and the Wasp was kind of helped push it forward, because it helps to establish the quantum realm.
Yeah.
Quantum realm. Thank you. Which is how they went back in time, obviously. to stop Thanos. But Shang-Chi, I feel like because that's the origin movie, I don't know how much it's going to make. I'm excited to see it, but I don't think it's going to do very well. I think that No Way Home's going to do very well. I think that the Eternals are going to do very well. And so, again, to answer your original question, I think that they're going to use Venom as like a test subject to see, where the audience is at and if they actually want to go out and support it in theaters. And then if it gets a decent turnout or a turnout that they deem acceptable, I feel like they'll go ahead and start pushing No Way Home.
Yeah, I definitely see where you're coming from with that, because when I'm thinking about the next movies that come out, I believe the next one that does come out is Shang-Chi. So I think Disney has not said that Shang-Chi will be on Disney Plus. They have not said it. And one of the big things is, are they going to delay it? Are they
But
going to put it on?
that's the thing. Like, they didn't say that Black Widow, right, wouldn't be on. They didn't say it would be on Disney Plus. Actually, that was the reason Scarlett Johansson ended up suing them, because they put it on Disney Plus without letting her know. So I'm saying they still have that to fall back on, even if they do or don't. It's still, the opportunity is there for it. Sony doesn't have that.
Yeah, Sony doesn't have that, and obviously they could probably release it on Disney Plus if they think that is a realistic thing, because they have a partnership with Marvel. Just the only problem, and I think that Disney sees it as they got it with Jungle Cruise and Black Widow, is your problem that you're going to have with piracy. The big thing that has to come with seeing a movie in theaters is that obviously somebody's not going to get an HD rip of the movie to spread it all over the internet. That's kind of one of the big things why a lot of people say that, it's not that big of an issue. But I'm going to say, if you're going to have a movie that should make $1 billion, like say Spider-Man Far From Home, you do not put that out anywhere other than in theaters. That is an Avengers Endgame type thing from everything we're hearing. Like, that is like a huge event movie that's going to happen. And of course, with all the rumors of multiple Spider-Man in it, like, if you put that out, if it can be pirated, it's going to be pirated. If it's in theaters, people will go watch it. And I think Disney knows that. Black Widow wasn't one of those movies that it was in theaters and you think about it and you're like, maybe I can wait to go see Black Widow. When Spider-Man comes out in theaters, or when I can't even say the Eternals because they're not that big of a name, but like, or even Shang-Chi for the matter, they're not that big of a name that makes you go, oh, I got to go see that movie. But Spider-Man, that's one of those movies where I could see them pushing that back if this is such a problem to them, because, and as much as I don't want them to push it back, that is a money-making movie. Every single Spider-Man movie that has come out has made a metric fuck ton of money. So I don't think that, even though I don't want it to be, and I want to see it in December, and I'm going to go watch it probably like 2-3 times in theaters, even if it's on Disney Plus, I'm going to go watch it in theaters. That's what they're banking on. I could see that movie getting delayed. I think that maybe Eternals and Shang-Chi might get the Disney Plus treatment, even though Disney doesn't want to do that. I could see them doing that just so that those movies can come out. But Spider-Man, no way in hell. And Venom is going to be the telltale for Sony, because if Venom comes out and it doesn't do that well because it's only coming out in theaters, Spider-Man's getting delayed. And maybe if Shang-Chi doesn't do very well, Eternals gets delayed as well, because that'll be Disney's point in the sand where they got to go, all right, we're going to put out Shang-Chi and see what happens. And if it flops, then Eternals might get pushed back as well. So, and as far as I know, the Eternals don't have, it's not like one of those big multiverse busting movies from what we've heard, especially in Shang-Chi 2. So I don't think if you push that one back, maybe if it has to go past Spider-Man, that it's going to be doing that much. But I think that your movies that are possibly getting delayed are Eternals and Spider-Man, but Venom and Shang-Chi will come out on time, whether it is that they flop or not.
Real quick, I do think Venom is going to be one of those MCU busting movies. I do. I think that Shang-Chi is an origin story. I think, did I say Venom? I meant Eternals.
Yeah, Eternals.
I think Eternals is going to be an origin story as well. However, I think that they're going to give more than just the origin of like the Eternals. I think they're going to go into the multiverse as a whole, where you have. I think that, like, you know how in What If they keep referring to the Watcher. I think
Mm,
the Watcher probably gets some shine in Eternals. I feel like they might talk about one of the King variants in
mm.
Eternals, like Ramatut could possibly, because you know they have some Egyptian like symbolism in
Yeah.
there. So I could see that being a movie where they say, okay, this is how the multiverse started and everything came to be about whatever, whatever. And I just want to say how bad I feel for Kevin Feige. Like, you drop Iron Man 1
Mm.
15, 20 years ago, whatever. Or was it, is it 10 years actually? Not 15.
That movie came out in 2008, I believe, or
Okay, so
2009.
okay, so I was thinking
Mm.
the 10-year anniversary.
Yeah.
So almost 15 years ago, you release Iron Man, and you have this intricate, just, you know, alignment, storyline, and
Mm.
then you put everybody together in Avengers. Great movie, right? And then you have Civil War, which kind of like shook the MCU as a whole, where everybody, you got like a lot more fans, and that was kind of like the beginning where it was like a phenomenon, right?
I
And
love
for
how
me,
you just went over Age of Ultron, like to
because
whatever.
no, 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 no. Age of Ultron is a good movie, and I think it was iconic, but I don't think it was like, I don't think it like brought new fans
Well,
to Marvel.
that's the thing. I personally am not the biggest fan. I think it's the weakest Avengers movie. I think a lot of people
Me
do.
too.
But
Yeah.
Civil War adds on to the movie. That's the thing that I saw you skip over it and then go to Civil War, and I'm like, yeah, well, Civil War kind of feels like, you know, just the adding on. It's the DLC to Avengers Age of
Right.
Ultron.
Absolutely. So I think Civil War, like to your point, was is one of
Mhm.
those movies, and then obviously you have Infinity War, which becomes
Mhm.
like the highest grossing movie ever, or something like that, right? And then you have, you know, Endgame, and now we're at this position where he's like, all right, we've got all this success based off of, you know, Iron Man, which wasn't even like one of the
Mhm.
A-list characters to begin with from the comics, and now COVID is messing everything up to the point where like you're trying to keep this well-oiled machine, you know, going forward, and now everything's getting blown up because we know how meticulous Kevin Feige and
Mhm.
Marvel is about, you know, what they do and don't want out, you know, in the universe. Oh, but about what they do and don't want out, as far as like information. So I think that the COVID is really ruining things as far as continuity standpoint for
Mhm.
Kevin Feige and Marvel.
Yeah, 100%. And all these delays are just going to keep making that go on and making Kevin Feige's day way worse. But the question is, what does everybody else think about this? What do you think about the delays? What movies do you think can afford to get delayed, even though none of us want any of them to be delayed? What ones do you think had the best chance of getting delayed? Make sure to let us know down below. Justice, recently I put you on to a movie that I need you to talk about because one of the things that just came out was DC released the Suicide Squad, and a lot of people are saying that it is the best DC EU movie. I argued that I think just kind of based on characters alone, I think it's great. I think James Gunn did an amazing job with Suicide Squad. I think it's an easy like 8.5 to 9 out of 10. I love it. I think that it's good going forward. It's kind of changing the tone. But I asked you, and we'll talk about Suicide Squad after this. I asked you to watch the Snyder Cut, which you had no idea about because of circumstance. Maybe you just never were buying into the hype, never actually heard about it. What did you think about the Snyder Cut? What did you think about it? Because I said originally, and I don't know if you did it, if you watched the original theatrical version of Justice League before watching that Snyder Cut, so you could tell the big differences of it. What did you think of the Snyder Cut as a whole?
Well, originally, like, I guess to preface everything I'm about to say, I didn't become a like a Marvel comic book character fan until Black Panther came out, right?
Mm,
Because it was just like this big cultural, and obviously I have the Chadwick
Yeah.
Boseman kind of tribute, but um, it was a cultural thing, right? And everybody was talking about how good it was, and I was just
Mm.
like, okay, I'm not a super big comic book guy, but
Yeah.
whatever, right? And so I go to the movie and I'm like crying at the end. I'm like, this is such a great movie, right? Like the music, everything
Mm.
was just awesome. And so then I find myself going into a deep dive about Black Panther and Wakanda and everything else. And then all of a sudden, before I know it, I'm a full blown Marvel stan,
Mm.
right? Um, so then, from my Marvel fandom, I kind of was like, oh, I've always been a fan of Superman. I've
Mm.
never like read comics or anything like that, but I've always been a fan of Superman.
Yeah.
So I watched the movie. It wasn't something that I was like super into at the time, but I did watch the movie, right? So then you told me about the Snyder cut, and it wasn't something that I really had like an emotional attachment
Mm.
to because again, I didn't watch it I didn't really
Yeah.
wasn't really a comics guy at the time. Um, so then you said the Snyder cut. I went back and I watched the original, and then I watched the Snyder cut, and it's like night and day. It's not even the same storyline. I don't even know
Mm.
how they're the same movie. Um, I would say that easily the Snyder cut is the best DC. The First of all, Christopher Nolan's trilogy doesn't count in the DCEU, if I'm correct, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't count.
It doesn't.
Okay, so then yeah, I would say Snyder's cut is easily the best movie. Like that movie, it was 4 hours long, four and some change actually. And
Mm-hmm.
like I sat there and I watched every single minute of it. It was amazing. It was just the way they introduced everybody, they gave everybody a
Mm.
backstory, and made everybody likable. Uh, you know, hot take: Batman was completely useless in the
Mm.
movie, but that's not even a hot take. He was useless in them. Like everything he did was redundant. Like everything he did, they could have just used Cyborg for. But anyway, um,
Cyborg doesn't turn into a giant jet, Justice. All right.
I mean, yeah, but like
But they
that was
don't know.
really it. It
Yeah.
was like he didn't contribute anything as Batman. It was just like his money
And
and his
yeah, and
accessibility.
that's the big thing that you put that on Twitter, and I was like, whoa, hold up, Justice. Like we got, like I know you don't understand what Batman is to the Justice League. Batman is not supposed to be the guy who's out there beating the shit out of everybody. Like the only reason Batman has and is in the Justice League is one, because I mean, in the comic books, dude's a genius, right? In
Yeah,
this movie,
Master
uh,
Detective.
but the big thing is, my dude funds absolutely everything. Like, just there's multiple scenes in the movie where he was like, how are we going to track it? We need to hack a satellite. He's like, oh, I have some. Really? Yeah, I have 6.
Six,
Like,
yeah.
or yeah, what's your superpower? I'm rich.
I'm rich.
Or like, yeah, like that is what Batman is. Like, really, he's not the guy who's on the front line. He's not going toe to toe with Darkseid. That's not
See,
Batman.
you know what my problem is
Mm.
when people tell me something, I take it personally, right? And
Yeah.
then I have to like absolutely destroy whatever your point was, right?
Yeah.
So like when people say, "Oh, Baker Mayfield's better than Josh Allen," now I have to destroy Baker Mayfield's
Yeah.
credibility, right? So
I
it's
will
the
make
same
him
thing with
look like the worst quarterback in the world.
exactly right. So it's the same thing
Yeah.
where people is like, "Oh, Batman can beat Superman," da, da. And I'm like, what are you like? That's not even a
Yeah.
logical right. So now, let me kind of revise what I'm saying.
Mm.
He wasn't useful to the same degree as Superman, and I guess
Yeah.
that's not really fair to make that comparison. But
Hmm.
people were making the comparison, so that's kind of where all this animosity
Yeah.
toward Batman came from. I respect everything he contributes. Is just that like when you say he's more important than Superman, it's kind of like
No.
it throws me
No.
off, right? Exactly. So that was kind of my whole thing with the Snyder cut. It was it was phenomenal. Quite honestly, I loved
Mm.
the origin story for Barry. I wasn't even a Flash fan until this
Mm.
until this movie. If I can be honest, I was not a Flash fan. I
Yeah.
was kind of like, he's okay. But after this movie, I love the Flash. Like I was like, he rewound time, and like as soon as the universe ended, like it was
Dude,
perfect.
that was okay. So I'm a huge fan of the Flash. not only is one of my favorite DC animated movies, The Flashpoint Paradox, which if you've never seen that, it's amazing, and it's what they're basing the next Flash movie that they're doing with
Where is
Ezra
that?
Miller on.
How do I watch that?
HBO Max, they've got it. The Flashpoint Paradox, where Barry goes back in time and saves his mom from being murdered, and it fucks up the entire timeline. And one of the big things is that like in the show, there's a show on the CW, The Flash, and that was one of the first times I had ever seen The Flash in my life. And I watched the first 3 seasons of that show and fell in love with the Flash character immediately. And when the original Justice League came out, like that Flash, yeah, he was kind of funny, and he was like, what is brunch? Like, what even is brunch? It's like breakfast, but you're eating it for lunch. Like, it's so stupid. And I felt like they were like ruining the character. I'm like, oh, come on. Barry is one of like the most pinnacle characters in all of the DC universe because of what he can do. And like this movie, the first time I watched the Snyder Cut, the ending, which spoilers, if you haven't seen the Snyder Cut, it's been out for like 4 months. What are you doing? But legitimately, he sees, like, he fucks up, and like when he gets shot by the parademon, and you can just tell that my dude like knows that he's about to fail everybody, and then the world ends, and my man goes, you gotta break your one rule. You gotta break your one rule, Barry. You gotta do it. And then he literally reverses time and saves everybody. Like just getting that character moment. I'm like, how the hell could Joss Whedon go in to seeing that movie and go, yeah, we're gonna cut that out? Like, that is a pivotal character moment for him.
I was thinking, like, I don't remember seeing that part. How do you cut that part? That was the most awesome part of the whole movie. Like,
yeah,
I don't get it. I don't get it.
And that's, I feel like just that what the DCEU as a whole, and let's bring this back into the question of which is a better movie in the DCEU. And I think it all comes down to your preference. If you weren't a Zack Snyder film type fan, then you probably didn't like the Justice League very much. And the DCEU as a whole is kind of changing with Shazam and Suicide Squad. They're getting a little bit lighter. It's not darker, but it all depends on which one that you really, really fancy. And I love the Suicide Squad. It feels a little bit closer to what Marvel would do, like when it comes to the look of the movie, but then the tone of the movie is fucking amazing. Like, I love just like the gory, stupid jokes. Like, I feel like that the dichotomy of the team and how they, talk to each other, and like if this beach was covered in a bunch of dicks and I had to eat every single one of them for liberty, I would. Like, that's like stuff like that.
Or when he's like, no one likes to show off, and he's like, they do if it's fucking awesome. He's like,
yeah, if it's
right,
cool as fuck.
Yeah, he's like, he's right, damn it. Like, I love that shit. I love it.
I loved it so much. And I think that when you're comparing the two movies, not only are they the two most different things on the planet from each other, but like just going as to what feels more important, the Snyder Cut feels like it is like the culmination of like all of these things happening, and then expanding the universe in this team getting together of all these superpower. Like, I know you probably don't know all of the stuff about Darkseid, and obviously he wasn't built up as much as Thanos was, but basically Darkseid is the Thanos of the DC universe. Actually, he was created before Thanos in the comic books, but
I literally told my little sister that. She's like, "Is that Thanos?" I was like, "Well, Thanos was based off of him."
Yeah, like he's one of the most super, like, seeing that and going like, there were supposed to be 2 more movies of this building up this whole fight with Darkseid. Like, I'm sad that we're not going to get any of it, and maybe that's something that you weren't aware of, but DC has come out and basically pulled the plug and said, "Dope, like, that's not even canon. That movie's not even canon. The one that came out in theaters is." And I just really hope that maybe one day they go back to it. But when you compare the two movies, Suicide Squad is great. I like that the way that the DCEU is going forward, they want to make it a little bit more, less Zack Snydery, but you definitely got to tip your hat off to Zack Snyder and how he tipped off his little trilogy of movies with the Snyder Cut, because it is amazing. And to me, is like a 9 to a 9.5 out of 10, just like how Suicide Squad, for its own reasons, is 9 to 8.5 to 9 out of 10. Like, they're just both really great movies, and it all just depends on what style you like. So the question is, what movie does everybody think is the greatest in the DCEU? Maybe you like the Suicide Squad. Maybe you like the Snyder Cut. Let us know down below. Justice. We got one more thing to talk about, and it's a
Real
gripe
quick
that I have. Oh, go
before
ahead.
we go into that, I would say that Suicide Squad is like an 8.8,
Yeah.
and I would give the Snyder Cut like a 9.3.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say that it's slightly better. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I like that tone. I'm not familiar with Zack Snyder's
Mm.
like movie type.
Yeah.
I'm a really big fan of Christopher Nolan. So I'm not super familiar with Zack
Mm.
Snyder, but that movie specifically was a very good movie. I was also a fan of the first Suicide Squad,
Yeah.
which I know a lot of people didn't like. Was that also Zack Snyder?
No, that was not. That was David Ayer, which actually
Okay.
happens to be another thing where, you know, the studio cut up the movie a bunch and changed it, and the movie
Oh, really?
stinks. But he's not going to get the Zack Snyder treatment. But no, in that movie, I think that movie is like average. Like, it's entertaining. I don't think it's the most amazing movie. Obviously, the new one is a whole lot better. But
Yeah, absolutely.
uh, if you've never like, obviously, I've told you Watchmen is a Zack Snyder movie.
Are you
300 is,
serious?
yeah,
Oh, okay. So Zack Snyder's that guy then, because I
yeah.
love Watchmen. Okay, okay.
Yeah, Watchmen 300 is a Zack Snyder movie. Like, there's so many good ones, and I like that he's doing this. Now he's doing stuff for Netflix and making movies for them, so good on him for that. But the problem is, Justice, we already talked about Spider-Man and what we think about it. But now let's talk about the movie itself. I have a problem with this Spider-Man movie, and it's a problem that I've had with this Spider-Man in general. Now, I want you to tell me what you think about that. Obviously, I've been on record of calling this new Spider-Man Iron Boy just because it pisses people off. But being a fan of Spider-Man, one of my two favorite heroes are Batman, Spider-Man, and then after that is the Flash. So, like, being a huge fan of Spider-Man, growing up with the Tobey Maguire movies, and then watching the Andrew Garfield ones begrudgingly, but I still watch them, and then seeing these Spider-Man movies, my big problem is that Spider-Man, it doesn't really feel like he's doing it all on his own. That was kind of the big thing about Spider-Man, was he was this kid in high school that became a superhero and was kind of doing everything on his own. One of the big things with this is to tie him into the MCU. They were like, let's tie him to Iron Man. Let's have Iron Man help him out. Now, obviously, he was doing his thing before Iron Man came to him in Civil War, but now he's been attached at the hip basically with the Iron Man character since then. And my big, big problem is that this new movie is coming up. And in the last two movies, I cannot tell you that those characters, the bad guys, hated Spider-Man because he was Spider-Man. I felt like they hated Spider-Man because he was in the way, because they hated Iron Man. That was the thing. They hated Iron Man, and Spider-Man was just in the way. And going and watching all of these Spider-Man movies, the best thing for a superhero is, I hate you, whatever your name is, superhero, because you're this superhero and I don't like you. And that's kind of my problem with this new movie, is they're now supposedly, we're going into spoilers here, so if you don't want to hear anything about Spider-Man Far From Home, click off of this video right now. I said Far From Home, No Way Home. If you don't want to know anything about this movie from the leaks that have come out, click off of this video right now. One of the things that has happened is that with the multiverse, there's supposedly going to be Spider-Men in this movie, right? Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, because confirmed in the movie is Alfred Molina, who played Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2. And Jamie Foxx is apparently going to be in the movie as Electro from the Amazing Spider-Man universe. One of my problems is that I don't think the MCU has properly been able to give Spider-Man his own villains because nobody just hates him for being Spider-Man. And my problem is that they said, okay, we're going to pull villains from these other successful Spider-Man movies that have been able to make these villains that hate Spider-Man and bring them into our movie because now we have villains that hate Spider-Man for just being Spider-Man. I feel like it's lazy. I think that it's just lazy writing to, hey, we couldn't find a way to make these villains hate Spider-Man, so now we're going to bring all these villains in from these other successful Spider-Man movies, which I haven't even gotten to the big one. I mean, there's other news. They've said that Willem Dafoe might be in the movie or is almost confirmed. There have been set photos that were then pulled off the internet saying that Willem Dafoe was going to be in the movie as Norman Osborn. And then they are saying that Thomas Hayden Church would be back as Sandman from Spider-Man 3, and that the Lizard from the Amazing Spider-Man 1 is going to be in the movie as well. And they're going to make their own version of the Sinister Six versus the 3 Spider-Men. Now, what the hell is the problem, Justus? How do you view them just pulling all these, and obviously maybe I'm just being a little bit too much of a Spider-Man fanboy, but them pulling in these villains that were set up in other Spider-Man franchises to hate Spider-Man when in their own franchise, they can't set up their own villains that just hate Spider-Man?
Well, and I do want to preface this by saying that I grew up a huge fan of the Tobey Maguire movies. I even like Spider-Man 3, which not a lot of people like.
Oh, I love Spider-Man 3, but
yeah, I don't understand the hate for it, but teach his own. I did not watch the Andrew Garfield Spider-Mans like at all. I haven't even seen clips of them, honestly. But I do love Tom Holland, right? Just because I was a kid, I would probably say Tobey Maguire is my personal favorite Spider-Man. So although I do think Tom has a lot of potential and I think that he can take it a lot of places, so I'm excited to see what he does with it. For me, it's kind of like what I mentioned earlier about how Feige, he to have Spider-Man come into the MCU and just kind of like be a standalone would have been pointless. I think that he was like, all right, we don't want to have Spider-Man in the MCU just to have him in the MCU, right? Like we want to have him integrated with everybody else, or I'm sorry, just so that he could eventually turn into an Avenger, right?
yeah.
So I think that that's kind of where they were going with that. They were like, all right, Tony can be his mentor. Tie him to Tony. We know, obviously, at the time, they knew Tony was going to die. So they were like, he could kind of start as the next, Iron Man kind of iconic, superhero type of figure, right? So I think that Marvel wanted to do that. They wanted to have him tied to Marvel in some way rather than just to have Spider-Man in the MCU and say it's a Marvel movie. So I don't necessarily hold that against them for right now. I do think that it'll be interesting to see how they manage this whole multiverse situation, where you have the 3 different Spider-Mans and then all the villains come in. I'm kind of anxious to see what they're going to do with that because, to your point, it could be lazy and they could just be like, oh, here's some, already well-developed Spider-Man villains. Let's bring them in and just throw them in a movie. And now we have Spider-Man villains. But I'll give Kevin Feige the benefit of the doubt because I think he deserves it. I think that, Marvel deserves for us to see where they're going with it. I feel like everything up to this point in Marvel has been pretty masterful, especially when you consider all of the hurdles they had to jump over. Just dealing with Universal with the Hulk and dealing with Spider-Man and Sony having to obviously acquire Fox because, there was no way Fox was going to let them use the X-Men without, So, I think that, and not only that, but to juggle everything, to have Fox properties come over, that's huge. Like that kind of I know that Marvel, they're very meticulous about their planning and everything else. So for them to have everything so intricately developed and planned out, and then to say, hey, we're going to give you guys the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, and Doctor Doom and everybody else, right? Magneto and Wolverine. Like,
Mhm.
now you have to kind of add these characters in, and you have to have them integrated with the MCU, figure out where you're going to plop them into movies, because we know Marvel loves to kind of give you a tease before they give you the real thing.
Mhm.
So I can imagine you see a Doctor Doom in like a Black Panther movie. I can imagine you see like a Magneto in something, and then
Mhm.
that kind of goes into the X-Men, whatever the case may be. So I don't necessarily, I definitely understand what your concerns are as far as it being lazy and kind of just them throwing villains at them. But they I think that they're trying to just kind of come up with a way to make everybody happy. You know what I mean? They're like, okay, we got the three Spider-Mans and the villains. Let's see how the public reacts to this, right? And then I
And
think
yeah.
eventually Spider-Man will develop his own his own like reputation to the point where, people hate him instead of just hating
Mhm.
Tony.
Yeah. My my big problem with it is just that they've had two movies and they've already done the same shtick twice of having people that didn't like Iron Man for whatever reason, and then Spider-Man is just in the way. So then they're making a third movie, they're making a multiverse movie. This is great. And I'm going to add a fact in here that I didn't throw in earlier of leaks that have come out. Um, so they're going to have all these villains in it. They're going to do a Spider-Verse movie, whatever. That's awesome. Into the Spider-Verse was one of my favorite animated movies that I've ever seen.
Amazing movie.
One of the best Spider-Man movies I've ever seen. If they want to take that concept, bring in the Spider-Man that I loved as a kid, and then the Spider-Man that ripped my heart out whenever they replaced the Spider-Man of my childhood in, and then Tom Holland, who I'm still trying to get that kind of a, affection to, that I like him as much as I did the other Spider-Man. Going into the third movie, them putting all that, like I've said, this is an Avengers Endgame type thing, that if they are going to have all this stuff in this movie, like, you're going to get old fans, new fans, everybody is going to watch this movie. And my only problem is that they're bringing in these villains for this movie, and the supposed ending is that Doctor Strange will get all of them back to their realities except for Norman Osborn's Green Goblin, which is the big one. That when I see that, I'm like, you couldn't have just made your own Norman Osborn. You had to go into a film franchise, which, by the way, they're pulling these villains out before they die in their said movies, because Norman Osborn is dead at the end of Spider-Man 1. Spoilers for a movie that came out in 2002. But he dies at the end of that movie. And then Doc Ock gets pulled out of the reality before he dies in Spider-Man 2. And then Thomas Hayden Church doesn't die in Spider-Man 3, but in this movie, apparently all of these villains say that Spider-Man has killed them in their realities, which would make no sense if we're going to go based on that. But if it's multiverses and maybe they're from slightly different versions of the universes that the movies that already came out, I can understand that, whatever. But my problem is, okay, they're going to send them all back. It's a one movie thing. It's fan service. I get it. But now they're going to keep Norman Osborn, which is a character they could have easily made by themselves, and they're going to take it from a universe that was already super successful and use that to move forward their universe. I just feel like they could have done it by themselves, and I just want them to develop. Now there's a Norman Osborn that hates Spider-Man because he's Spider-Man, but they didn't develop it. He just hates Spider-Man because he already hated Spider-Man from a different universe. So I just think it's slightly lazy. I wish that they would change it. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm going to love it. I'm going to love it. Now, obviously, I'm also going to have my problems with it. Like, I've had problems with every single of the MCU Spider-Man movies, but I still think that there's things they need to improve on. It's just my big problem with this film is I need them to be more original than just being like, okay, we're going to bring in all these villains, and then one's going to escape and he hates Spider-Man, and who knows, maybe that goes on for Spider-Man 4 or whatever they call it. So I don't know. That's just my big problem. Do you have any closing remarks on that before I ask the people what they think?
I'm not gonna lie. I was a fan of the J. Jonah Jameson type of appearance. Coming from obviously I don't know if it was the original Spider-Man movie, but the Tobey Maguire
Yeah.
interpretation. I was a fan. I really do like him. And so I was happy to see him kind of brought into Marvel. However, you did mention, you said Strange would get everybody back to their timeline.
Yes.
So do you think that they'll have the multiverse figured out by that point?
No.
Or how does that happen?
I think what happens is the leaks have said that something happens and these villains get put in from their realities, but just because all of the realities are out of whack does not mean that Doctor Strange cannot send them back to where they came from. It's just kind of like when there's a hole and you plug it and then another hole pops up. That's kind of just what happens. So, okay, they're going to get sent back, but that's not going to be the only problems in the MCU. And so that's what's going to happen there. That's what they say. They also say at the beginning of the movie, he puts them in like a prison. He's getting all these different variants and people that are showing up that aren't supposed to be there and putting them in a prison. Like there's a whole lot of stuff. Strange. Okay. So there's a lot of stuff going on with it. And I think that this movie has the potential to be really, really good. And I think that them using all the villains again is lazy, but if they're going to have a whole plot centered around having the 3 different Spider-Men in there that have fought it, I understand that. But carrying it on past this movie to when they could have easily developed their own Norman. And you said you liked the J. Jonah Jameson. The thing that I liked about that was it was the same character played by the same actor, but it wasn't the same J. Jonah Jameson from
very true.
That movie. It's technically a different one, but they did the fan service. So if Willem Dafoe showed up as the Green Goblin and Norman Osborn, but he wasn't from the Tobey Maguire universe, he was just Norman Osborn in name only, I would like that a hell of a lot more than I do them just plucking him from a different universe from a successful Spider-Man and being like, here you go. Now you have Spider-Man's greatest villain now in the MCU. And
however, in WandaVision, we did have the Quicksilver
Ralph Boner
spotting. Right, exactly. So do you think it could be like maybe a trick, kind of like how that was?
If I get Ralph Bonered in Spider-Man Far From Home, even once, I would there will be fire. So
there will be carnage.
there will be carnage. Let there be carnage. So what does everybody think about that? What do you think about these Spider-Men coming in? And, it's going to be a fun time of a movie. What does everybody think about the villains? Do you think it's just okay we're getting the Spider-Man movies? Maybe I'm looking too much into it. Let me know down below in the comments section. But Justus, first ever Maximum Marvel pod,
super fun,
an hour and 18 minutes. And people are getting this pre-recorded. It will drop, but eventually we're going to be doing these live. So in time, we're going to be having people commenting with us, throwing around our takes and what we think on things, man. I cannot wait for this. It is
man.
This is going to be awesome.
Flew by. Like, this was an awesome episode. I'm really glad we decided to do this.
Yeah, we got to do this, and then we got to go do something later, and then I don't know what I'm going to do tomorrow for my pod, but I'll try to at least get an hour in on that. So thank you everybody for listening. This has been the Maximum Marvel Pod episode 1. So make sure, true believers, to come back next time where we will see you guys in a flash.